The Institute of Marriage and Family Canada recently released new research examining the relationship between poverty, families, and government. To bring us up to date, I'm joined by one of the authors of the study, Rebecca Walberg. And Rebecca, how much is our government spending on poverty alleviation?
Well, when we looked at the different programs administered in each province to relieve poverty for broken families, we found that across Canada we're spending $7 billion a year.
Wow. So you explored that relationship between strong families and a strong economy. Tell us what you found.
Well, we found that this is a pretty big category of government spending and that there's a strong relationship between the breakdown of a family and increased dependence upon poverty alleviation programs. This includes obviously programs like welfare, but it also includes housing subsidies, childcare subsidies, and most provinces have a form of assistance for medical expenses like glasses and dental care for families that are below a certain income threshold. And we know that for a broken family, when a single parent has to cope with raising a child or children on their own, they're much more likely to need to depend upon the government for this sort of help.
So lone parent families are taking $7 billion of care by government agencies.
Broken families, yes. This is a small piece of the overall welfare pie because there are, of course, singles and married couples who need government support. But we found that, yes, if we could eliminate family breakdown, we would significantly reduce spending on social programming.
Okay, define broken families.
Well, we're using it in the narrow sense to mean a single parent family, a family that's been broken down through divorce or through a breakup or through a family never having been created, but we're also talking about it in the wider sense. The social aspect of family breakdown is the transition we've seen where, 50 years ago there were certainly single parent families, but there was a social consensus that the ideal was for mom and dad to get married and raise their kids and spend a lifetime together. And what we're seeing now culturally is that this isn't even the ideal anymore. And this contributes to a very high rate of divorce, but also of people never getting married in the first place. So we're defining family breakdown narrowly for the purposes of adding up direct costs, but more broadly in terms of the culture that supports all of this.
Okay, and is this an increase from what we have seen? Do you know what kind of percentage of increase over a large period, let's say 20, 50 years?
In terms of the number of families that are broken?
Yes.
Well, in the 1960s, I believe 92% of households with children were headed by a married couple. And it's also important to note that then there would have been a significant number of single mother households caused by casualties in the war. So, 2 generations ago, 92%, and now we're looking at somewhere in the low 60s of households with children are headed by a married couple. About 1 in 7 is headed by a cohabiting couple, and another 1 in 7 is headed by a single parent. But when we talk about single parents, we're really talking about women because about 90% of single parents in Canada are single mothers. And especially when we're talking about poverty, single fathers no doubt have the same pressures other than finances to cope with that single mothers do, but single fathers do much better financially than single mothers.
Okay, and this is what you mean by the feminization of poverty, is that right?
Right. We talk a lot about children in poverty, but children, of course, very seldom live on their own. They live with their families. And so if we're serious about stopping child poverty, then we have to talk about what makes children likely to live in poverty. And the answer is one of the biggest factors for risk of living in poverty as a child is to be part of a single parent household, which in practice often means a single mother household. So if we want to get serious about stopping child poverty and preventing it, we need to take the issue of marriage much more seriously.
And how are we doing on this issue as a nation compared to other countries?
Well, one of the things that emerged from doing this research is that we don't know very much about how we're doing because we don't track this. The studies that have been done in the US and the UK especially have much better data than we do because a lot of their numbers do pay attention to these things. They do ask whether families in crisis are single parent families, cohabiting families, and married families. And what we found doing the research for this is that that level of detail and information isn't even available here. In terms of what we can compare, we, like the US and the UK and New Zealand, spend an awful lot of money on poverty relief for broken families. Our number is actually much more conservative than the ones that have been turned out by studies in the US and the UK because we look only at direct costs like welfare and housing subsidies. Those studies have looked at things like the cost to the healthcare system, the cost to the education system. And we know those costs exist here in Canada, but we've chosen to omit them, partly because we want to make sure that we're erring on the side of too low a number rather than too high a number. And also because the data is much harder to come by here.
All right, now you've come out with some recommendations for the crisis over poverty and lone parent families. What are those recommendations?
I think a big one is starting an honest discussion about marriage and what it means. You know, we tell children in high school about the dangers of sex and drug use and bullying and dropping out of high school. We're quite honest with kids when we say, if you want to earn a decent living, you can't drop out of high school. And we don't give them information to help them make good decisions like this about other aspects of their lives. We don't say to them, if you want a stable, solid, financially sound family, your best bet is to get married before you have kids and stay married. So we need to start by giving people the information they need to make decisions that are in their own best interest. We should look at things like income splitting for tax purposes, which would allow families to file for taxes jointly. What this does is attach a bit of a financial incentive to being married and keeping your marriage strong and raising a stable family. And it also effectively puts a lot more control and choice back in the hands of parents. It makes it easier for parents to decide what the best arrangement is for childcare and work for their particular family and their needs.
You know, Rebecca, I just want to close with a question. There's some people who'll kind of shrug and say, gee, I thought all of that family breakdown was putting a burden on our tax dollars, and here you've added it up at $7 billion. It doesn't leave me very hopeful for improving poverty where it lives in the city. What would be your advice for that, for a hopeful outlook on this?
Well, what we do find is looking at family composition in every province but Quebec, the great majority of households with children are headed by a married couple. In Quebec, still the majority are headed by a couple, but more of them are cohabiting and not married. But it's clear that the majority of Canadians understand that the ideal is a married couple raising their children together. And our hope is that by pointing out that there is a high fiscal cost attached to this kind of failure, we'll also get people to look at the other costs. And you can't put a price tag on parents who are alienated from their children and children who don't know one set of grandparents because of a family breakdown. But we can put a price tag on social services. And our hope is that by talking about the high financial toll that family breakdown wreaks, we can persuade people to take a look at the rest of it. We know Canadians do care about marriage, and we're trying to give them a reason to care about it a bit more and to talk about it a bit more.
All right. Rebecca Walberg, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.